course. So, anyway. So, Dr. Jove Aguas is a full professor of the Department of Philosophy and a research fellow for the Center for Religious Studies and Ethics. So Dr. Aguas is also the executive governor of the Philippine National Philosophical Research Society, or PNPRS, and he's also the editor-in-chief of Philosophia, an international journal of philosophy. So Dr. Aguas has also had a lot of publications. Some of them are published in various international journals, and we also have some of his publications in Critique. He has recently published a number of books. He has a book on Pope John Paul II, or Karol, Wojtyla, entitled Person, Action, and Love. And he also recently published a book on philosophical anthropology, right? On ethics. He also has a book on philosophical anthropology coming out on August. So, without further ado, I'm very happy to invite Dr. Aguas for the lecture.
First of all, I'm sorry I'm late. I should be here around before 8 a.m. But last night I was thinking of what I'm going to lecture about. I know it's philosophical anthropology, but since I'll be talking about Buber and I have the whole day to talk about the philosophical anthropology of Buber, I might as well talk about the whole of Buber. I don't know if that is okay with you. Instead of just focusing on his philosophical anthropology. Okay, so what I did this morning to sort of fix my notes so I can have a more full discussion on Buber. Now, if in case you don't want to hear about the whole of Buber, then you can just tell me, shut up, stop, and let's do something else. Okay? All right. This is a lecture, right? And this is not a paper presentation, so I'll be asking you some questions as I discuss. I'm going to treat this like a classroom setting. Okay? So I have my notes here. I'll be reading some parts of them. The more important ones are colored blue. Just to give you a clue that these are the important parts of the notes. Okay? If there is something that you cannot understand, then please, by all means, raise your hand, ask questions, ask for a clarification. Okay? Some of you are very good in writing, copying what is there. But for the benefit of everybody, I'm willing to share the whole handouts. Okay? That's 160. 160, but of course, because that's reading the view it's only about, I think, 40 pages. It's actually part of a book. Of course, I have included some of the lecture notes I have given to my students. But this is a more complete notes because I have a manuscript which I wrote about 3 years ago about the three intersubjective philosophers, my favorite philosophers, Buber, Marcel, and Wojtyla. So I just have to lift that part on top, Martin Buber, and then added some of my lectures on Martin Buber. So this is the whole thing, okay? All right, just some questions here. How many of you are philosophy majors? No. Those who are not philosophy majors. 1, 2, okay. History, right? And? Okay, so more or less hindi naman foreign, no. Those who have a background in existentialism. Pakitaas yung kamay. Existentialism. Okay, so hindi ba iba yung background, no? Because we're going to talk about existential anthropology. So I want to, para alam ko lang kung hanggang saan yung extent ng explanation ko. No? Kasi baka mamaya, I'll be presuming a lot of things na alam nyo na ito, alam nyo na yan, and then yung pala hindi nyo masyadong komisado. Okay? So, first, so I'm going to divide my lecture into 3 parts. The first one would be the introduction, and then introduction to Buber's philosophy, the character of his thought. And then, the next lecture will be about dialogue, interpersonal relationships. And then, the last lecture will be about the other stuff about his philosophy. His philosophy, religion, education, etc., etc. And then the last part, I told Artie that there will be a workshop, because he asked me if there will be a workshop. The last part will be a workshop, but I'm thinking of what workshop I'm going to give you, considering that it's just a lecture, and I'm used to talking about for 3 hours. I hope you can bear with me for 3 hours, but we're going to have short breaks in between. Okay, so this afternoon, we'll see what is needed. If there's a need to talk more about Buber, then I'll do that. Otherwise, I have in my mind what workshop we can do. Okay, but that will depend on the proceeding, how we're going to proceed in this lecture. Okay? Any questions so far about your expectations, what you want to know about this lecture? Maybe you can figure it out while I'm giving the lecture. Okay? So, my introduction, existential anthropology and personalism. So, these are the questions that we ask today, especially about the question about man. What is man? What is the human person? What is his relationship with his fellow human beings in the world where he exists? What is the purpose of his existence or of his life? Okay. And many other related questions. Okay. Now, these are some of the present questions in philosophy, and time again, philosophers and other thinkers will always have to ask these questions and offer their different answers. Right? In philosophy, you have the many questions, and then answers, and then more questions come out. Okay? But this is so far the basic questions in philosophical anthropology. Now, while there are other philosophical questions out there that you can ask, the more worthy questions, or the more worthy of our attentions, are the questions about ourselves. What is man? So, it's been the concern of many contemporary philosophers, and I think if you're going to survey the whole of Western philosophy, it's during the contemporary time that this question about man been the center or the central focus. Okay. Ancient philosophy, they have other concerns. Medieval philosophy, other concerns. Modern philosophy, other concerns. But it's only in contemporary period that you have man as the central focus. Okay. So, it's the contemporary philosophical anthropology. I say contemporary philosophical anthropology because there are other philosophical anthropologies that we can think about. So we cannot discount the fact that Aristotle has his own notion about man, so it's also a philosophical anthropology. Even the medieval thinkers have their own respective philosophical anthropology. They also talk about man. Okay, but contemporary thinkers, they focus specifically on the human person and the value of the human person as a concrete subject. Now this term here, concrete subject, takes a very particular meaning in contemporary philosophy. You don't often hear that in Aristotle as that concrete subject. In Aristotelian or in ancient and even in medieval or even in modern philosophy, you hear the word subject. But it takes a different meaning in contemporary philosophy when you hear the word subject, subjectivity. Aristotle and Thomas have a different notion of subjective, or the subject, they interpret that as suppositum. And suppositum is a metaphysical concept, which you hardly find in contemporary philosophy, because they have a different metaphysics or ontology. Okay? But by that I mean they have a different way of explaining reality, being. Okay? If you're going to compare the being, for example, of the being of Aristotle and the being of Heidegger, they're very much different. So they have a different view of ontology. So, in the midst of consumerism and materialism and the heart of society, so engrossed with technological advancement, I think that's what motivated these contemporary philosophers to talk about the human person. So they focus now, instead of just talking about man as a rational animal, okay, man as, say, a cogito, for example, now they focus on the dignity and value of the human person. The dignity and value of the human person. Of course, you can go back to Aquinas and even Kant, they will talk about dignity of the human person. But, you know, with all these developments, with all these changes in the modern world, changes that somehow make our life easy and convenient, but the irony is that, despite this convenience, despite this efficiency, for example, there's no other time in the history of mankind where dignity is trampled upon. So I think these contemporary philosophers focus on not just on the human person as a concrete subject, but they focus more on the value of that person, the dignity of that person. And then of course, these philosophers, they have their own way of explaining what is the source of this dignity, what is the source of this value. Okay, you can go back to Aquinas, and Aquinas will say, well, because man is in imago Dei. Or you can go back to the formulation, the categorical paradigm of Kant, saying that the human person is not a means, but an end in itself. So different philosophers will give us their own take about what is the ultimate source of this value. Alright, so while technological advancement has provided some benefits, mostly material and practical, and some has made human life less burdensome, the downside is that, as I've already mentioned, the human person has been reduced to an object. That's why the counter discourse of this man as an object is man as a subject. But of course, what is this man as a subject? What is the meaning of this subject? You cannot go back to the subject of Aristotle, the suppositum, for example. Yes, of course, it's important to understand man as a subject, to understand man as a suppositum, but in the minds of these contemporary philosophers, that will not do much. If in philosophy we will always talk about metaphysics and ontology, and some people don't understand even these terms, it will not make any difference in their lives if you're going to talk about metaphysics or ontology. So you have to talk about subjectivity in a different sense, in a more existential sense. Do you get my point? You understand? Alright. So, the human person now in this time is deprived of personal qualities or individuality. Sometimes he is treated like an object or thing, and he does not, what he does meaning, what I mean by what he does, the product of his labor, the product of his work, is treated more of a commodity. And I think that what Marx said about alienation of labor rings a bell to our minds. Okay? Our products are alienated from us because these products of human labor are treated as commodity, devoid of any personal quality, okay, or personal trait, or personal value. Reminds me of what Wojtyla talked about, personalistic value of the action. Our action, the product of our action are personal because they are products of the person. That's why it has a personal value. So, the human person sometimes experiences a loss of personal identity and a feeling of being an anonymous cog in a social machine. Now, this usually happens when someone or the society imposes or demands that its beliefs, values, or ideals be accepted and followed by the human person. And this is just some sort of a critique of what's happening in our society today. Right? So, of course, like for example, I heard Artie mention about, well, we don't want this lecture to be like a gulag, but we have to, we have to follow the requirements. Okay, so you have to check, you have to sign your attendance, etc., etc. Well, that's very important. But sometimes if you are reduced to that, then you feel like that. Okay. So this destroys the individuality of the person and makes him become whatever the people in power desire. And this, for contemporary philosophers, dehumanizes the person and reduces him to an object. So there are many ways by which the human person can be dehumanized or reduced to an object. Okay? In your classes, I think in your classes, when you teach this course, you can mention a lot of examples about the dehumanization, the depersonalization that the modern society causes on the human person himself. Okay. Now, however, and this is the good thing about philosophy, I hope, even in other disciplines, we are not lacking in those individuals who constantly remind us of the inherent value of the human person. In the midst of, for example, in the midst of all these killings that's happening in our country, there are still people who tell us, who say that the human person has a dignity, he has a value, regardless of what he does. Okay? And in philosophy, we are not lacking in this kind of people. So there are thinkers who recognize the value of the person as subject and are more mindful of the sad state of the condition of the human person in the midst of the advancement and fast-paced world, but seemingly lacking in deeper meaning and value. And there are also those who realize not only the value of man as a subject or person, but that man is worthy of our attention as a subject of study. You see, these are two different things. Man as a subject of our study, and man as a subject or as a person. And Buber will highlight these two things. While it's important to study the human person as a subject in philosophy, but when we study the human person as a subject in philosophy, we have to have in mind that this subject that we are talking about, that we're studying philosophy, is in fact the human person. So while we are here in this class, or in this lecture, we are considering man, the human person, as a subject of our lecture. We should not lose sight of the fact that this very subject that we are studying in this lecture is actually a concrete subject. So when we teach this subject or this course, this notion of human person to our students, let's be mindful that our students are human persons. It will be a disgrace, it will be an insult, it actually be a disservice to philosophy itself if we're talking about the human person to our students and we don't treat them as human persons. Tinuturuan mo sila na ang tao ay nire-respeto, mayroong dignidad, may value, pero yung estudyante mo na tinuturuan mo, hindi mo nire-respeto. You understand? Alright. So wag tayong masyadong, alam niyo yan, pagka nagtuturo ka, parang kailangan maituro ko ito na maayos. Pero nakalimutan mo na yung tinuturuan mo, yun mismo yung subject na itinuturo mo. Di ba? Kaya napakahirap magturo ng good manners and right conduct. Pwede mong mapaliwanag yun. Pero kung binabato mo ng eraser yung estudyante mo, ikaw yung counter-example ng itinuturo mo. So alam mo ng estudyante, alam na namin ma'am kung anong gagawin namin, hindi namin kayo gagayahin. Alam na namin sir, hindi namin kayo gagayahin. Kaya ikaw, kasi ikaw ang konkreto example ng opposite ng tinuturo mo. See? Alright. So, these are two things. Focus on man as a person and focus on man as the subject of our study. Okay? pupunta si Buber. So only by studying man, what he is, what are his concerns, his intentions, his purpose in life, his aspirations and destiny, could we fully understand his essence as a complete individual subject. Okay? So while we study man, subject of our study, we must not lose sight of the fact that this is the very person that we are talking about. He's not just an object or subject of study. He's a very subject himself. Okay? So, Buber in his essay, What is Man? This is actually, I think, you were given the primary sources of the lecture. So, you can see this. He goes Malibranche here and he writes, of all human knowledge, the knowledge of man is most deserving of this study. So he focuses on one thing, all right? He's focused on not the human person as a subject, but the human person as a subject of study. Because there are many other objects of human knowledge. There are many things that we can study. We can study numbers, we can study society, we can a lot of things. But according to Buber, of all human knowledge, the knowledge of man is the most deserving of our study, of his study. Okay? And I think in this lecture we are just focused on that, to study man himself. Right? Yet, this knowledge is not the most cultivated or the most developed which we possess. And it helps now that we are having this lecture about philosophical anthropology. I'm sure Buber will not say that to us, because we are, you're supposed to be somewhere enjoying your vacation, but here you are listening to a lecture about philosophical anthropology. Okay? So I think, well, that quote from Buber is not addressed to us. I hope it's addressed to those other people who are not concerned about, they don't cultivate their knowledge about the human person. So the generality of men neglect it completely, and even among those who busy themselves with this knowledge, there are very few who dedicate themselves to it, and still fewer who successfully dedicate themselves to it. Where do we belong? Hopefully we belong to the few who successfully dedicate ourselves to the study of man. Okay? However, man has to struggle to focus on the wholeness of man. That is, to treat man as a whole subject in accordance with his total character. We're talking about the whole man in his wholeness, not in his uniqueness. And we're going to discuss that more in detail later on. So, in studying man, either man considers all things and excludes himself, or study man as divided into different aspects that can be treated independently. So this is Buber's critique as to how we study man. You can study man, okay? We study first the other things and then exclude man, or study man is divided from different aspects. An approach that he said is less problematic. Why less problematic? Well, if your approach is like that, you don't have to elaborate more. No, as a teacher, we can just make a division. These are the things. These are the objects. These are things, and this is what things are, and this is what man is. Okay, or we can just categorize man. So we can study man in the political aspect, in the historical aspect, in the cultural, social, economic, etc., etc. So if you have sort of an outline, then it's easy to teach that to our students. And when examination comes, it's the only thing you will have to ask from them. Enumerate all the qualities of man as a political subject, as a social, as cultural, as religious. And then when our students are able to answer those questions, flat 1. That's less problematic. And the question is, have they become a better person? You see posts on Facebook about graduating with honors, but not honorable. they graduated with honors, but they don't have the good character. And, you know, helping our students develop good character is more problematic than this. And that is the challenge to us, as teachers of this course. How to make our students better persons at the end of their course with us. That's the real challenge. You know, I always remember this what happened in my class, ethics class, many years ago. I always remember this encounter with one of my brightest students. Before the final exam, we're just wrapping up the lecture. And Peter, and I really remember his name, Peter at the back stood up and asked, "Sir, yeah, done very nice, discussions, lectures on ethics. But how can we do this in the real world? How do you expect us to do this in the real world?" What he means was, how can we be ethical when we go out there in the world? And I told him, rather frankly, "Peter, if what you answered in your exams are just for the sake of answer my exams, and you cannot do that, you think you cannot do that in the outside world, I'm going to fail you right now." Nagulat si Peter. Siyempre, he's running for honor. Terror ako sa klase. Nagulat siya. Because the final exam in this course is not the final exam you're going to take days after. The final exam is when you go out there in the world and apply these principles that you have studied in my class. Now, if you have some doubts in yourself that you cannot apply this and be a moral person, that's economics, major in economics. So that's why you're probably thinking about, when I go out in the world, go out in the business world, and you know about the corruptions, and he was probably thinking, how can I apply this? So he was shocked when I said, I'm going to fail you right now. Because that is not the final exam that you will have to take. The final exam is out there in the world. So, you see, the point is, there's a greater challenge for us. We can make our students bright. Okay? Where they can answer the questions in the final exams. But the real exam is out there in the world. How they become better persons. See? You think of that. I always think of that all the time. I'm thinking how this lecture can help you become better teachers so that you can help your students, better students at the end of your course. Parang nagbigay ako ng sobrang bigat na responsibilidad sa sarili ko. But every time you give that lecture, that's the responsibility that you have to accept. See? Alright. Alright, so much for that. Kaya kailangan kong mahabang oras kasi hindi ko matatapos dito pag dami kong kwento. Anyway, so Buber acknowledges that Kant is the first to formulate these proper questions. And you know these questions from Kant. The 4 questions. Alright? Okay, so handbook of his lectures, Kant said these are the 3 or the 4 questions philosophy in the general sense should ask. First, what can I know? That's a question about epistemology. Second, what ought I to do? That's a question of ethics. What may I hope for? That's a question of religion, the afterlife. And last question is, what is man? Okay, what is man? And for Buber, that is the most important. What is man? But he said, Kant, despite the numerous works on the knowledge of man, never touched on the real issues about man. Like man's place in the world, his connection with his destiny, etc., etc. Those of you who are scholars in Kant, you know what Kant said about practical reason, pure reason, category imperative, etc., etc. We are not here to discuss that. Okay. So hence, for Buber, we need to consider man as a subject. As a subject. So, when you study man in philosophy, you have to study man as a subject. Study him for his own sake, Study man for his own sake. Not just part of a science or just an object of study. See the point of Buber here? Do not just study man as an object of study. Study man for the sake of himself. Okay. And I think when we apply that to our class, we study philosophical anthropology, we study man, not just for the sake of understanding man, but for the sake of our students to understand their humanity, their personhood, and their value. So yes, we have to study man, but man must be considered as a concrete subject. And what is this man as concrete subject? We. Okay? Your students, you, individually. We are men, we are human persons. Okay? So when we teach the human person to our students, do not dwell on the so abstract things about the human person. Okay? Because you have the most concrete example of the human person in front of you, your students. You yourself, is a human person. So, today, there is a general inclination to study man. To study man in his own concreteness. Not to study man just as a concept. Okay? This is the challenge for us philosophy teachers and lovers of wisdom. Sometimes, when we study a particular concept or a particular notion or object, we are so engrossed with the concept. We are so engrossed with the concept that we have forgotten what this concept represents. The real thing, the real subject itself. Like for example, we're so engrossed with studying God. We have so many concepts about God. But we have forgotten that God is actually a being, a real concrete being. I always say, there are many people who talk about God, never talk to God. In the same way, there are many people who discuss about the human person, but never talk to a real person, in the real sense of the word, to talk. We talk about, we never talk to. See, we talk about, we never talk to. These are two different things. So, one example here is Gabriel Marcel, who criticizes modern society in its tendency to treat human beings as merely objects. Objects to be studied, to be described, to be manipulated. And that's what we do in philosophy sometimes. See? We're very fond of definition, of distinction, etc., description, but we never engage with the thing that we are talking about. So Marcel singles out applied science as a field of human interest that manifests its aptitude and tendency. Karol also notes that the political and social upheavals that were happening in our time have affected our appreciation and understanding of the human person. In our time, he said, there's a time controversy about the human being, about the meaning of existence. It's about the nature and significance of the human being. Right. So, in order to uplift and promote the dignity of the human person against these political and social ideologies, we need to have this kind of philosophical anthropology. So what is this philosophical anthropology that these philosophers are talking about? It's a philosophy of the human person which regards everyone, regardless of race, religious beliefs, or political orientation, as a human being with dignity must be promoted. And I think whatever kind of philosophical anthropology that we discuss or teach in our class, it should be a philosophical anthropology that will treat the human being with dignity. And that human being is not just a concept, it's a concrete subject. As concrete as me standing here and you sitting there. The human being is concrete as your students listening to you, or your co-faculty members, or your friends, or your colleagues, and many other different persons. They have different personalities, but they are human persons. Okay? Any questions so far? Clear? Appreciated? I mean, not my lecture, but appreciated the subject. I mean, you need to appreciate the lecture so that you can apply this to your class. Okay, and when you apply this to your class, hopefully your students will become better persons at the end of the course with you. Never mind their grades. Because the grades, they will just be written on the paper. They will never be something that will say about themselves. Maybe it will say something about themselves, maybe 5%. But the kind of person they will turn out to be after your class, that's the more important thing. Okay? Alright, so I go now specifically to Buber's Anthropology. So that's a very general introduction to philosophical anthropology. So now we'll be talking of Buber more specifically. No questions about the first part. You are philosophers. I know you are cooking something in your minds. No? Sir. Oh yes. See, maagang nagluto ito. Okay, sige. Go ahead.
I don't know, this clarification,
Yeah.
parang mas may nabanggit ko na pinapag-aralan yung tao.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're studying the person as a person, are we not in some sense treating the person as an object, at least an object of study?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Medyo detach it. So parang we have to detach a bit
Yeah.
something about the self, understanding the other, and then assist. There is a separate substance that I need to study.
Yes. Yes. That's the attitude when we study man as a subject of study. Okay. So I mentioned about two things. When we study, we treat man as an object because he's a subject and object of our study.
But scientific, parang detach. You have to detach.
Yeah, you have to detach. There must be some kind of a detachment. I'm going to use, for example, the existentialists they always use the term existence. And for them, existence is to stand out. Stand out of yourself. And when you stand out of yourself, then you can see yourself. So that's standing out. It's also a form of detachment. Buber will say that's a form of distance. There's a detachment, there's a distance, there's maybe a disconnect, but it does not remain in that detached attitude or orientation. Because you have to attach, sooner or later, you have to attach to itself, because you have to see, that's the human person I'm talking about. That's a concrete human person. So you're right, there is a detachment, but we cannot remain detached from there. And for these philosophers, that's the mistake of the other sciences. Like, give you an example. Yes, if you are a doctor and we're going to treat your patient, you have to have a detached attitude from the patient. Otherwise, you will not be able to cure the patient. But you have to look at the patient, not just as a patient with this disease. That's a human person you're treating. So there's a detachment, but at the same time, an attachment. There's a distance, but Buber calls this reflection. By reflection, it means you go out and then you go back. Even in Aquinas, they will say, well, you have to objectify the object of your knowledge. Intentionality, right? So detached, but you have to go back to that object. So there's a detachment and standing out, but at the same time, a return kind of reflection. Right? Any questions? More? Right. So now let's go to Buber's Anthropology. So we know, those of you who have studied existentialism, that Buber is known for his philosophy of dialogue. I-thou relationship, I-it, interhuman, etc., etc. Okay. So his philosophy of dialogue, however, the point of departure for such a philosophy of dialogue is philosophical anthropology, meaning the problem of man. See? So philosophy of dialogue should be a philosophical anthropology. For Buber, philosophical anthropology is the study of the wholeness of man. And I think I have already mentioned what does he mean by the wholeness of man. Don't just when you say wholeness, that doesn't mean that you have to focus just on man. Because the wholeness of man is not focused only on himself, on his identity. You also have to consider the relationship of man. His relationship to the world, to other human beings, the God, etc., etc. Okay? So he set up a philosophical anthropology as a systematic method which deals with the concrete, existential characteristics of man's life in order to arrive at the wholeness and the uniqueness of man. So these are two concepts that you will often hear from Buber, the wholeness and uniqueness. Okay? The medical, and this is his critique of the other sciences. The medical and biological sciences are so concerned with the question about man, but they focus more on man's relation with nature, reducing man to a natural object or a physical or biological organism. Now, Buber is not faulting medical science for this, because that is the very nature of that kind of science. Okay? It's the very nature of that science to have that kind of attitude. That's why you don't have a medical philosophical anthropology. Okay? So, science investigates man not as a whole and unique being, but as part of nature. Of course, you're going to ask, is that wrong? Of course, it's not wrong. That's the very nature of this kind of science. Okay? It studies man in selective aspects and as part of the natural world. The scientific method is the most perfected development of the objective way of knowing its method of abstracting from concrete reality, reducing the I, meaning the person, to an object. And that method, according to Buber, is based on the I-it relationship. Okay. So again, it's not to say that this is wrong or this is evil. Buber is just saying that that is the case with the natural sciences. They have perfected this. Well, to some extent, we do that in the sense that, as Alvin asked, detach from the object of our study. But it's not as perfect as the one in scientific method. See? Because they have totally detached themselves. You see, imagine the medical students in the anatomy laboratory dissecting and identifying the parts of the cadaver. That's scientific method for you. That's the I-it relationship for you. An objective way of looking at the cadaver. Medicine will not progress without that. The doctors will never be able to heal our illnesses without this attitude. We will all die. So the point here is that it's not wrong. But that's another way of studying man in a very objective way. Okay? So, on the contrary, the ideal relationship makes the conception of the wholeness of man. Meaning, when you try to consider man, not just a cadaver, not just a body, but man is a friend, that man is a parent, that man is a student, that man prays to his God, etc., etc. He lives in the world. That gives you the total picture of what man is. Is it possible for the medical students to ask himself, when he's trying to dissect the cadaver, sino ba yung mga kamag-anak nito? Pwede niyang gawin yun, di ba? Sino kaya ito? Ano kaya naging buhay nito? Ito ba na napunta siya rito as a cadaver ay ginusto niya? Di ba? Nag-execute kaya siya ng will na kapag namatay ako, huwag niyo ko i-cremate, huwag niyo ko ilibing. Donate niyo ko sa hospital, sa UST hospital, at gawin niyo kong cadaver para pag-aralan. Meron tayo nakakaisip na. Ang daming cadaver po sa anatomy, dyan sa limang, dyan sa medicine. Table dun eh. Naalala ko, turo ako sa nursing. Final exam nila sa ibang room. Pagpasok ko doon sa room, pinicturean ko pa yun eh. Merong kama doon sa gitna ng room. Hindi naman cadaver. ano lang, parang mannequin lang na nandun sa gitna. Sabi ko, first time ko makakita ng classroom na merong mannequin ng tao, yung human body na nandun sa room nila. So, yung mga nursing students, ganun yung kanilang attitude. Objective, I-it relation. Hindi ko nga lang tinuro ito sa kanila. Magandang example sana yun, di ba? O, nakita na kayo ng I-it relation, yung attitude ng I-it, yung objective, ayan. Pag inaaral niyo yung cadaver na yan, ganyan yung attitude ninyo. Iniisip niyo ba kung sino yung bangkay na yan? Sino mga kaibigan yan? Nasaan na kaya yung kaluluwa nitong taong ito? Ang laki ng contribution nitong bangkay na ito sa medicine at sa magiging mga pasyente ko. Kasi kung hindi dahil sa bangkay na ito, hindi ko maaaral kung paano sila gagamutin. Kasi ang layo ng inabot ng, kung gano'n yung philosophical reflection mo. Eh, sana gano'n din yung mga estudyante natin, lalo pag nagturo kayo sa nursing. Ay, isip niyo ba yung bangkay na yan? Kung sino yan? Malaki ang pakinabang ng bangkay, ang tulong ng bangkay na ito. Pero kung hindi dahil sa kanya, hindi gagaling at matututo yung ating mga doktor at hindi sila makakagamot ng mga sakit natin. Very existential yung bangkay na yun. See? Okay, anyway, so, only through the eye now we see the wholeness of the human person. Okay? So, and reserve relation with the construction rather than as a sum of the parts of which are considered objective, etc., etc. So, the study of the wholeness of man is connected with the question regarding his place in the world, his destiny, his relation to the world of things, his understanding of his fellow human beings, his death, and his attitude towards the mysterious. So again, go back to that cadaver there. Well, you can only see the cadaver. But if you're going to see this cadaver as the body of a person, and this person, he has his family. Meron din siyang ambisyon. Meron siyang pananampalataya. Nabuhay din siya. Meron din siyang contribution sa mundo kahit papano. Then you see the wholeness of man. See what he meant by the wholeness of man, not just, the objective side. There's nothing wrong with looking at the objective side of man, but in order for us to appreciate the wholeness of man, we have to see, this total picture. So, man's essence is determined by the fact that he shares both infinitude and infinity, and this is where Buber tries to introduce the religious aspect of his anthropology. That his anthropology is not just focused on the finite, on the here and now. One side of that anthropology is man's relationship with the mysterious, with the infinite, with transcendence, with God. Of course, there are other philosophical anthropologies that will just focus on the here and now, that will just focus on man's temporality, man's being in time. Heidegger, after death, what happens? Well, we don't know, as far as Heidegger is concerned, because we can only understand the being there of man in his temporality. At least Heidegger is not saying there's nothing there. What he says is we don't know. Okay? After death closes everything. It's the cord that ties up everything. Nothing is outstanding. Everything is closed. We don't know what happens after death. Okay? But for Buber, he extends man's existence to infinity, to the mysterious, to the beyond. And that's one important aspect of his philosophical anthropology. So, Buber explains that we are connected with the finitude by the fact that we can only know particular things, and we participate in the infinite by our ability to know at all. The purpose of philosophical anthropology, according to Buber, is not to provide a foundation for metaphysics, as Heidegger did. Such attempt will only be very general and will achieve a false unity of man, not a genuine wholeness. And I told Buber here, he said, a legitimate philosophical anthropology must know that there is not merely a human species, but also people. Not merely a human soul, but also types and characters. Not merely human life, but also stages in life. Only from the systematic comprehension of all these and all other differences can it come to see the wholeness of man. In order for us to understand what Buber is telling us is this. It's like you see man in its completeness in the here and now. And when you do an ontology or a metaphysics, you try to go back. Okay? You try to go back. What is the source of this wholeness? Why is he in the first place a man? So when you step back, you see, well, he is one of the many other things. He's all. If you go back to Aquinas and Aristotle and Aquinas will tell you, well, he is a subject. Okay, a substance. I think that's the more accurate term to use. A substance, and as a substance, he is one among many substances. See, but instead of going back to the substance, what Buber says is that this is a complete man. If you look forward to his life. His life will not just be, he will not just be a species. Man is not just a species. When you look forward to what man is, you have to see, well, there are different people. Not just human species. Yes, we belong to one species, but we are also different people. See? Yes, we have souls, but there are many different types of people, characters, etc., etc. Yes, there may be just one human life, but there are different stages of life. See? So this complete human person, me for example as a complete human person, have different stages in my life. I was born, then child, then adolescent, then adult. Hopefully we'll go into old age. See? So the human species is not just one particular. Yes, there's just one particular human species, but there are many different people. Yeah, do you understand? When you force on a kind of ontology, on a kind of universal substance, you have a tendency to go back, step back, babalik ka dun, para makita mo, oy, ito yung tao. Iisa lang pala siyang speck dun sa maraming substances. Is that wrong? Hindi naman mali yun. Di ba? Kailangan mong bumalik din dun para magkaroon ka ng ontology. Pero ang tingin ni Buber, hindi lang natin pwedeng tingnan ito dito. Kung gusto mong totoong philosophical anthropology, kailangan tingnan mo yung nasa harap mo. Hindi lang yung nasa likod. Hindi lang human subject. Maraming human subjects. Maraming klase ng tao. Pag tinignan mo yung tao ito, yung complete person na ito, stages ng buhay niya. At marami siyang mga relationships. Okay? So, in philosophical anthropology, man himself is given to man in the most precise sense as a subject. And the investigator or the philosopher must consider man as a whole subject and not just part of nature, or not just one of the many substances, or not just one of the many beings in the world that have an anima or has soul, whatever notion of soul you have. You must realize that he himself, so when we teach a subject, we have to realize that we ourselves are man and experiences his humanity in his inner experience in a way that cannot be experienced in any part of nature. So there is the wholeness, but at the same time, now he introduces that notion of uniqueness. We have so many relationships, connections with other things. But there's nothing, nobody in this room can duplicate you. Nobody can duplicate what the phenomenologists would call your lived experience. Because that lived experience is your personal, unique experience. The irreducible, according to Wojtyla. The irrepeatable. You're listening to one lecture, right? I'm the only one talking right now. But how many are you? Yeah. Your take on my lecture can never be duplicated by the take of your seatmates' take about my lecture. Even your thought process cannot be duplicated. You are listening to one in the same lecture, but your thought process about this lecture can never be duplicated. That makes you unique. You know, kung magkaribal kayo sa isang babae, at isa lang ang tinitingnan nyo, at isa lang ang iniibig nyo, hindi maduduplicate ng karibal mo kung gaano mo kamahal yung babae ito. In the same manner na hindi mo rin maduduplicate yung pagmamahal niya doon sa pareho nyo iniibig. Uniqueness. See? A few days ago, lahat Father's Day, Happy Father's Day, Happy Father's Day, di ba? Pag binasa mo yung mga post ng mga bumabati doon sa kanilang mga tatay, kung ano yung kanilang tatay, mahirap makakita ng duplication doon. May pagkakapareho pero iba siyempre experience ng isa doon sa kanyang tatay. That makes every person who posts on Facebook unique. Kasi although puro Father's Day yan, iba-ibang live experience about their tatay. Hindi ba sabihin sana nandito si tatay? Hindi ba sabihin sana wala dito si tatay? First, hindi ba sabihin sana hindi nila ako nagkaroon ng tatay? Bakit wala akong tatay? No? Di ba sasabihin, di ba sasabihin, huwag na yung Father's Day na yan kasi anti-feminist yan. Anyway, you see, iba-iba. This is what it meant by uniqueness. So, for Buber, philosophical knowledge is essentially man's self-reflection. Our reflection about ourselves. And man can reflect about himself only when recognizing person. We, for example, the philosopher pursuing anthropology, first of all, reflects about himself as a person. Kanina sinabi ko, you have to consider your students as a person, di ba? When you teach this course, you can still step back. Ikaw mismo tao pa eh. So, if you discuss this thing to your students in class about how does it feel to be a person, tatanungin mo yung mga estudyante mo. Una, tanungin mo sa sarili mo yan. Tinatanong mo yung mga estudyante mo, napakahirap na question. Sabi yung kaya tanong yan, masasagot mo ba yan? See? It's always self-reflecting. Alright. So, other investigators may just see man as a detached, objectivized subject. Man is something separated from the connection with the whole real person. The philosopher stakes his real wholeness, his complete self. Hence, he said, it's not enough that he stakes himself as object of knowledge. And again, I quote Buber here. He can know the wholeness of the person and to the wholeness of man only when he does not live his subjectivity out. Kailangan tingnan mo palagi yung sarili mo. Ang reference mo palagi, when you talk about this, philosophical anthropology, sarili mo. And does not remain an untouched observer. He must enter completely and in reality into the act of self-reflection in order to become aware of human wholeness. Hindi ko alam kung mayroong philosopher na magsasabing ganyan, no? Kasi karamihan ng philosopher na maririnig natin, they will talk about this is man, this man, this man, this man. Categorize, classify, etc., etc. I think it's very pronounced in Buber na before you can talk about man in general, tingnan mo yung sarili mo. Kasi ikaw yun. You're actually talking about yourself. Okay. Questions? Okay so far? Worthwhile ba naman yung pagpunta nyo dito ngayong araw na ito? Baka naman inahandog na kayo. Yeah? Parang, yun nga, actually, pag nung binabasa ko ito, hindi kaya mabato yung mga teachers na makikinig sa akin dito. Para akong retreat master dito. Kulang na lang sabihin ko, kumuha kayo ng papel, at sulat nyo kung ano mga nakikita nyo sa sarili nyo. Sabi ng isa, positive, thoughtful, generous, helpful. Dami, puro positive. Sabi nung katabi niya, wala ka bang negative? Puro naman positive yan ang nilagay. Sila naisip ko eh. Ano yun? Dishonest. Lahat ng positive na wala. Isa yung kapag ka-dishonest ka, lahat ng magandang sasabihin mo sa sarili mo, mawawala yun. Kaya, meron kong post sa Facebook nung lumabas yung honesty issue. Isa lang, honesty is the best policy. Yan lang, hindi na yata importante sa mga Pilipino yun eh. Alright. So, to do this, according to Buber, in order to do that, reflect on ourselves, we must enter into this unique dimension as an act of his life, without any philosophical security. That means exposing himself to all that he can encounter in real life. Without any preconceived ideas, he encounters life, the world, and fellow men. He touches them, and he is also touched. Hindi ko alam kung paano niya ituturo ito sa mga estudyante niya. Kasi malamang, yung feeling niyo ngayon, ganun din yung magiging feeling nila. Sir, punta lang tayo sa UST, punta lang tayo sa Kalerwega. Yun yung retreat. Yun yung doon kami pupunta para mag-retreat. Bakit po nyo sila tinuturo ito sa classroom? Parang pangit na nasa classroom natin pinag-uusapan ito. Maganda siguro sa Kalerwega or kung saan retreat house.
Sa Baguio.
Baguio. Maraming distractions doon eh. Siguro kung sa Baguio doon sa malayo sa city. Alright. So all of this, can we understand the wholeness of man? We can fully understand the human person on the basis of his essential relation to what is. Okay. So, to be aware of a man is to perceive, I've been talking about this, wholeness of a person determined by his spirit, to perceive the dynamic center which stamps his very utterance, action and attitude with a recognizing sign of uniqueness. So I've been talking about wholeness and uniqueness. So, what we need is to find the essence of man in a constant flux of individuals and cultures and try to avoid the abyss of abstract unity and meaningless relativity. That's a quote from Buber. But by essence, it does not have a universal and abstract nature of the human person because that abstract nature of man cannot be applicable in the concrete human person. So, more words on this about the universal essence of man. Okay, what is this universal essence of man? Because we can always talk about, as I said, if you are into ontology, then you have to have that universal, that conception of universal essence. Okay, as a substance, for example. But Buber does not talk much about that. Actually, he said there's no such thing as a universal essence of man. Okay, no universal essence of man. Does that mean that man is not man? It's just that he hates that kind of ontology that reduces man to one part of nature, just one of the many species, okay, a universal soul, etc., etc. He does not want that kind of metaphysics or that kind of ontology. He said man's essence is constituted by his participation in finitude and infinity, and his uniqueness is determined by the particular existential characteristics of his relation to mystery, the cosmos, destiny, death, and his fellow men. So when he talks about people, characteristics, types, alright, stages of life, that's actually the kind of essence he's talking about. So my essence is not just defined by me being a substance. My essence is defined by the many things that happen in my life, stages of my life, the many people connected with my life, etc., etc. Okay? Specific, complete, existential characteristics. My relationship to the transcendent, my relationship to the cosmos, my relationship to death, etc., etc. That's a kind of anthropology, okay? That's a kind of essence that Buber is talking about. So, he said, there's no absolute essence of man. Of course, he recognized the corporeality. He recognized the spirituality of man. But there is no universal essence applicable to all human persons or men. Men, he said, must be conceived as a specific individual person, unique in himself. And I've given you examples to this. He is in himself a total person determined by spirit. Man is a dynamic center which stamps his every utterance, his every action and attitude with the recognizable sign of uniqueness. Anybody could speak here about Buber, and they would have their own, their own way of discussing about Buber. They will have their own unique thoughts about Buber. Okay? But the one speaking here has his own unique take on Buber, his own unique way of talking about Buber. You have so many here in the class, and you listen again, you're listening to one lecture, but you will have your own unique interpretation of what you hear in this lecture. And when you try to teach this to your students, you will also stamp your interpretation of Buber with your own uniqueness. So Buber refuses to define man's essence based on his being an individual or his being a part of the collectivity. Man's being is found in his being a subject, and by that subject, whole subjectivity, a complete individual existential subject. And of course, he is a subject who is unique and who actualizes himself in relation. This is again something that is unique now to Buber, because the other philosophers who will talk about the wholeness and uniqueness of man, but Buber will talk about relation. And of course, there will also be other philosophers who will also talk about intersubjectivity, human relations. I mentioned about Marcel, about Wojtyla, you can talk about Levinas, etc., etc. But Buber has a very unique interpretation of this relation. So the person, he said, becomes fully human in relation. And Buber locates the essence of man in his relationship with the world, with his fellow man, the divine. He said man is a being in relation. So now we are now zeroing in on that particular concept of Buber about human relations. So, just to summarize this, and I think this is the last part of this first lecture, then we're going to have a short break. Okay. So I said, he defines man as a creature capable of entering into living relation with the world and things, with men both as individuals and the collective. Men as individuals and collective, because Buber talks about interpersonal relationship and social relationships. So the interpersonal is personal, the social is the collective. And of course, mystery of being. By that mystery of being, he actually refers to God. As I've said, that's one aspect, very important aspect of his philosophical anthropology. Studying very closely the development of the problem of man, Buber is critical of the answers offered by other philosophers. So in his essay, What is Man, he was actually criticizing the other philosophical anthropologies. Aristotle, Santo Tomas, Augustine, Kant, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Kierkegaard, Scheller, etc., etc. Of course, that's a different, separate course on Buber, and we are not interested so much about what he talks about this philosophy. So, he was critical of the Western philosophy, post-Socratic scholastics, and down the line. And actually, here are some of his criticisms there. Okay, so I will skip some of these. Here, I talk about that he does not want a kind of anthropology, or a kind of one type of ontology. But Buber does have his own ontology, because I always believe no philosopher can have a philosophy without an ontology. That may sound surprising to some other people, because some philosophers do not engage in any ontology or metaphysics. other philosophers are very allergic to the word metaphysics or tautology. But the reason for me saying that is that you cannot talk about whatever you talk about man, talk about society, etc., etc., and many other things, propositions, etc., if you don't have a concept, an implied concept of what reality is. I say implied because you may not discuss this, you may not express this, but you, as a philosopher, you must have your own take about what reality is. So if the logical positivists say reality is facts, that's the ontology. That's how they view reality. World of facts. And thoughts are copies of the facts. They're not doing an ontology, or they are not trying to express their ontology, but there is an implied ontology behind that. I'm not saying metaphysics, because by metaphysics we mean you are expressing some kind of a telos, an end. Okay? Aristotle wrote about metaphysics. He talks about the four causes, and there's a final cause to that. The final cause is the telos. When Sartre and Heidegger talks about ontology instead of metaphysics, they don't want to talk about metaphysics. Because metaphysics gives us already a telos. It tells us already what man is and where man is going. Ontology is different. It's a description of what reality is. And a philosopher, to talk about the many things you talk about, he must have a take, at least an implied take of what reality is. It must be an ontology, not necessarily metaphysics. You understand? Now, of course, when you write a thesis about these philosophers, it's a challenge to say, so what is his ontology? Because normally they don't say that. They don't express that. There must be an implied ontology in their philosophy. No matter what kind of philosophy you try to develop, you must have a take, or at least a description of what reality is, and that is an ontology. We go back to Sartre and Heidegger, who made a distinction between metaphysics and ontology. That's why Heidegger said, I'm not doing an existentialism. I'm actually doing an ontology. Because he's trying to describe what being is, what reality is. And nobody, no philosopher does philosophy without a description, at least an implied description of reality, a kind of ontology. That must be an ontology. The question is, do we know the ontology? Do we know his take about reality? Alright, so, here we see the ontological foundation of Buber's anthropology. His entire logical philosophy and his notion of intersubjectivity are based on an anthropology that recognizes the wholeness of man. And that, for me, that would be his ontology. This is his take about reality. That reality are so interconnected, that the reality of man is so interconnected, it's actually based on relationships. Okay? So this anthropology is based on the recognition of the totality of the human nature. That totality of human nature is seen in the wholeness of man, in his relationship with many other things. Human nature is not only reason or animality. If you're going to do a metaphysics of Aristotle and Aquinas, this will be very pronounced. Man is man. What is man according to Aristotle? It's a rational animal. That's metaphysics. Why metaphysics? Because as reason, there's already a telos. See? Aristotle talks about the telos. The end, the purpose of life, eudaimonia, happiness. So there's already a telos there. So it's not ontology, it's actually a metaphysics. So, man is a unique and specific totality. That's the, not only reason or animality, but man is a unique and specific totality. That's a kind of description of the reality of man. That's an ontology. anthropology is at the same time an ontology. Ontology is the same that it does not only explain what man is and what he ought to conceive man, it also explains the basic reality of man. The basic reality of man. The nature of man, the whatness of man. Okay? So that is his ontology. So the reality of man is not found in a dual nature, rationality and animality, but it's found in his wholeness. It is found not only in his reason, but in his specific subject. Only when we consider man as a whole, we're able to grasp the true nature of man. The reality of his being is unique. So, I think I have this. So, here, this is just an admonition of Buber. Man is what actualizes, relation is what actualizes man's being. He becomes fully human when he is in relationship. So, this is the ontological basis of man's being, to be in a relation. And that relationship we're going to talk about in the next lecture. Okay, so I think I will have to end there. Any question? And then the next topic will be the character of his thoughts. So I'll be talking about the different aspects of his philosophy. Questions? Yes?
You were talking about Buber's philosophy that is basically anchored on relationship that is dialogical.
Dialogical.
But how about in family, for instance, like it's happening again and again that a father, a mother, and as well as children, when they are on the table, although they recognize their presence, but they are so busy doing their cell phones, etc., etc. So what can Buber say about this kind of what we call this happening in the family?
Oh, if Buber is alive, he will probably tell us that do away with the cell phones. Do away with the cell phones because it's, and this is actually an example of the point I made at the beginning of my lecture. That because of technological advancement, life is so easy, it's so convenient. It's easy and convenient to communicate. But because of this, we have lost all real sense of communication. Nandun sa isang kwarto, imbis na tawagin, text. O text na lang. Nandun na sa isang table, kakain lang, imbis na mag-usap. Lahat. So siguro kung buhay si Buber, sasabihin niya sa atin, tapon niyo yan. Pero syempre, hindi niya kailangan sabihin tapon. Kasi nga, we have to appreciate and recognize and appreciate what technological advancement has given us. Convenience, etc., etc. But we have to take this in the right perspective. There are tools. No? Technology, tools. Let's not be slave of technology. And I think that's what Heidegger actually said. Let's not be slave to technology. Suppose this thing just bugged down and they don't have a PowerPoint. Can I still do a lecture? If I cannot do a lecture without this, I become a slave, a hostage of technology. Can you not communicate without the cell phone? If you cannot communicate without a cell phone, you become a hostage of technology. And let's not be hostage of technology. Right? For our sake, let's not be hostage. I mean, it has its own advantages, given us this and that. But, take that in the right perspective. Yes?
You mentioned earlier about the idea of detachment.
Yeah.
Could we also presume that there's also a value to isolation when it comes to Buber? Or is it totally, a person finds himself totally in relation, and isolation is something that he rejects? Kasi po yung basa ko kanina is, there could be some kind of swing from isolation to but at the same time it's isolation, but at the same time it's also relation.
It does not totally reject the isolate. It's not really isolation, no, because isolation would be a total detachment. What he uses is the concept of distance. Distance, meaning he has this idea of the primal setting at the distance. Primal because that's the first position that you take. You distance yourself. But distance doesn't mean a disconnection. It's just a stepping so that you recognize that I am a different person from the other person. I am unique. And that distance is the one that actually allows me to enter into relationship. So in that relationship, you don't lose your own subjectivity. You don't lose your own uniqueness. And this is one thing I like about Buber, and that's why in my dissertation I try to connect Buber and Wojtyla, because more or less they are on the same wavelength. Wojtyla talks about, for example, the unrepeatability, the irreducibility of the person, that a person is unique. But he's not saying that person is totally detached. Because Wojtyla talks about in marriage, when the two becomes one. And I remember somebody in academia asking, actually messaged me about, how can the two become one in Wojtyla? Okay? What actually makes this possible, the two becoming one, is love. Of course, in love, you don't really lose your own individuality. Husband and wife, they don't lose their own individuality, but they become as if they are one because of love. So these things will not be possible if you don't put in the other concept. So yes, you have to have that kind of distance, but it's not totally a total detachment. When you become totally detached, that's a different attitude. That's now, for Buber, that would be the I-it relation. That's why for Buber there should be, he said, there should be some kind of pendulum, a swinging back and forth. I-it, I-thou. And you cannot remain in the I-it. You have to go back to the I-thou. You cannot remain just in the I-thou. You have to be, like for example in the class, I tell my students, well, see, when I give the lecture, I treat you as thous, okay, as my students. But when I compute the grades, I am in an I-it mode. Okay, I am in an I-it mode. So you see that swinging back and forth. See? And it's not just Buber and Wojtyla talks about this. Other philosophers like Marcel talks about disponibility and indisponibility, participation, involvement, and the indisponibility, unavailability. Okay, so there's always the concept of, I always see the person in front of me as something that is, I am attached, I am related to, so I can participate. But if I see this person as totally detached, as object, then I cannot enter into a relationship with him. I see myself as totally detached. Why do I see myself totally detached? Because I see myself as somebody who is complete. I don't need other people. So I become indisposable, unavailable to other people. But when I see myself as, I can only complete myself. When I relate with other people, I see other people, I can participate. And I think you being here, that tells a lot. I cannot do it all by myself. I have to attend that lecture and get the units, etc., because I need other people. Other questions? Yes.
Sir, I'm just curious, since we're talking about philosophical anthropology, and Buber mentioned the actualization of a human being is his relation to other human beings. Is there anywhere in Buber's writings that he established the I and thou relation or articulation in the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Oh yeah, actually he's an advocate of the Israeli-Arab-Palestinian relationship. He actually promoted that. So yeah, he's an advocate of that relationship. But of course, the thing is that he does not want to do with politics. It's something very, very political. In fact, if I may also add, he joined this movement of Zionism, and for the members of the Zionist movement, it's a political movement, and he does not want to see this as a kind of political. He must see this some kind of a cultural movement, going back to the roots, going back to the cultural roots of Judaism. And when you consider this concept as cultural, not political, then you can more or less you can avoid all these political conflicts. But when you reduce everything to politics, and that's actually what he's trying to avoid, that all these conflicts, all these comes in. Any questions? You don't want to ask? Can we have a break? Oh yeah, okay. So go ahead.
Malayo lang. So, can an animal also relate to us in an ideal relation? Or always as an ideal?
Surprisingly, yes, according to Buber. I remember there's a thesis on mutuality with a tree, mutuality with a tree. You will understand it when we talk about his meaning of dialogue, especially when he talks about the meaning of presence. Because mutuality is not always an external, an outward action. That, for example, there is mutuality can also be seen in the context of something is given to you, and something is given is not always in the outward manifestation of a physical action. Okay, a physical action. So, for example, can there be a mutuality within tree, and tree represents nature? Yes, because nature gives something to you. There is the mutuality there, and in the negative side is that nature is a way of giving back what you give to it in a negative way. You see, tapon ka ng basura dyan, ibabalik sa'yo yan. Sino nagbalik sa'yo? Minsan yung nature ang nagbabalik sa'yo. So you can understand that the mutuality in that sense. So, yung mutuality, yung dialogue ni Buber, hindi siya yung dialogue na nag-uusap lang tayo. He made this example about meron siyang paborito doon sa farms, estate ng kanyang mga grandparents kasi doon siya lumaki sa grandparents na naghiwalay yung kanyang magulang when he was very young. So doon siya lumaki. Meron siyang paboritong kabayo doon. Na-feel niya yung mutuality na kapag ka naalagaan niya yung paborito niyang yung paboritong kabayo yon. Merong response, yung presence. Kahit kayong mga pet lovers, pwede nyo gamitin si Buber. Hindi ba ganun din ginagawa ng mga pets? It gives back. Nandun yung mutuality. Okay? So, malawak yung mutuality na sinasabi nila. Hindi lang yung person, kahit sa nature. That's why there are many writings, there are many articles that use this context of Buber sa relationship. Relationship with nature, with environment, with animals, etc. Yes?
Sir, I would just like to ask for some clarification. The way I understand Buber's proposition that man becomes fully man through relationship, para sa akin kasi it implies some sort of gradation in a sense that you are fully man and you are not. So how would Buber call or at least label people who are incapable of building relationships, like the man, or people with
Crazy.
Yeah, crazy or has mental illness.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I agree with you that there is some kind of a degree or gradation in the relationship, right? But before we go to the degrees of the relationship, Buber, I think, lays down the very foundation of this relationship. It's the awareness of the presence. He calls this just becoming aware. And what is this becoming aware? Just being aware of the presence of the man. Because when you, for example, when you look at the people with mental illness, first, the attitude should be that you are aware of the presence of this man, regardless of whether he is sane or insane. Because that's the very basis of the I-thou relationship, that I become aware, I recognize, I respect your presence as a human person, regardless of your qualities, of your traits, etc., etc. Because it's when we now focus on the qualities, on the traits, whether you're sane or insane, that we are drifting away from the I-thou and going into the I-it relationship. Now I try to objectify that person, and that person is crazy. cannot remain in, we cannot just drift away and then stay there. For Buber, what's important is that we go back and then recognize again that this person whom I identify in my I-it relation attitude as a crazy is actually a human person.
But isn't that either relationship could only be established if it's dialogical?
Yeah.
Meaning the other side should have the same understanding with you.
No. The mutuality there should not always be that my thinking should be the same as his thinking. Because and that's,
I mean, at least the person you are having dialogue with should be aware about you, or should be aware.
yeah, okay, yeah, okay. See, go ahead. Before I answer that, yes, you have something to say.
Sir, I just want to react to what he was saying.
Okay, go ahead.
Because when I feel like what Buber would say is, if I understood what you were telling us about this, when he says that it has to be dialogical, he's understanding it as our own way of conversation. So we're actually making it an I-it. When you're saying that the person should respond like me, it's just you're trying to fix the dialogical relationship into a very objective, and that's not the point. There are other forms of dialogical and relatedness. Because I'm telling you, sir, based on my own experience, because I had that when I was a college student. I had that question also. But I'm just gonna share that on the basis of my personal experience. My dad had a stroke 3 months ago, and he's not the same person. And he's not the same person I always talked to when I was in college. But I'm telling you that now that he's this kind of person, when he survived his stroke, he had there's no more. I mean, nothing in my life has affected me more emotionally in relating to my dad than what he is now. I mean, what he can talk the same way. He can respond to me the same. I can. Sometimes there's trouble in communication, but I'm telling you, there's a relatedness there. And for me, that's even greater than when he was before he had the stroke. So it doesn't have to be the same conversation. It doesn't have to be the way we see a normal conversation or relatedness.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, that's right, because for Buber there are many levels of dialogues. You know? One dialogue would be the conversation, and the one that he has now with his dad is as genuine a dialogue as can be than other dialogues. And in fact, as he said, it's more meaningful now. It's more profound now than before. So, going back to your first take, there are some degrees and gradations. Yes, right, but the gradation should not be higher or lower, because sometimes it could actually be more profound. It could be lower in the sense that I can no longer talk to him the way I talked before, but the relationship, the dialogue now is more profound than before. All right? No more questions? Maybe you... Oh, yes?
Sir, some clarifications lang po regarding sa sinabi niyo po sa mutuality or relation natin sa other. Kagaya nga po sabi ni Buber, yung relation natin sa nature. So does it imply that our mutuality or relation does not necessarily need a rationality?
Yes.
So it can also be related to instincts only.
Yes. Yes. Okay? Other questions? No more? Maybe if you have questions, you can just reserve that to the... Yeah. No, let's not talk about Uber during the... Let's talk about something else. Okay. Anyway, so we have... How many... I think 11 minutes to break that. Okay. Alright. So we continue our discussion. This is now the second part of my lecture. This should be actually part of the first. Pero medyo napatagal yung discussion natin doon. So, I will discuss first the philosopher Buber in a broad, process, try to cover almost the whole of his philosophy. And then I will focus on, the next part will be focused on the notion of dialogue. Okay. So, so the main headings here, dialogical and relational, and then religious, and then existential and situational, and the last part will be against the personalization. So there are 4 parts of this discussion. So the first character that you can obviously see in Buber's thought and in his philosophy is that the concept of dialogue and relation. Okay, so his philosophy is centered on the dialogical and the relational. But what do we mean by dialogical and relational? So number 1 is that for Buber, man is a being in relation. Actually, you can write that with being dash in dash relation. Parang yung being there, no? of Heidegger, because this thing should be considered as one concept. No? That's the meaning of the hyphen when you write this normally. So, as man is capable of, he must enter into a living relation with others. Must enter into a living relation with others. And that living relation is different from relationship in general. We are in a relationship in general, but there is some kind of an admonition on the part of Buber that we have to enter into a living, mutual relationship with others. And the others there is not just man. The other could be, as well mentioned, could be nature, it could be the animals, it could be God, the world, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, man is better understood in the realm of the between. I'm going to explain this later, this realm of the between, because this is rather a very complex concept of Buber. I will reserve that for the next discussion. Right? Only man with man provides a full image. That's from the between man and man. It is entering into relation that makes man really man. Meaning, for us to be a genuine human beings or human persons, we have to enter into that I-thou that I already mentioned, I-thou relationship. Okay? So only man provides with a full image. Man with man. That's actually the title of the book, Between Man and Man. The idea of Buber is this. There are 2 ways, basically 2 ways by which we can see man. We can see man in isolation from others as an individual, or we can also see man in relation with others, meaning in the collectivity. So there is always the 2 perspectives about man, individuality and collectivity. And somehow, what Buber says is that there can be a third alternative. Okay? An alternative that is between being individual and being part of the collective. Okay? Because if you're going to just focus on the individual, just focus on, for example, one particular star, and then you forget the other stars. And if you focus on the collective, you see the entire universe, but you miss out those individual stars. So what Buber is trying to say is that we have to see the third alternative between individuality and collectivity. And that's actually the between. No? The between there is not between individual and collectivity. The between is between one individual and another individual. It's the between that makes the relationship possible. So we'll talk about that later. Now, second is that relationship is grounded on dialogue. So, the concept of dialogue is very rich and very complex in Buber's philosophy. So don't think of dialogue as conversation. We're going to discuss dialogue immediately after this. Don't think it's conversation, it's just talking, it's just speech. Because it has a very profound meaning in Buber, the dialogue. Okay. So the idea of relations based on dialogue, in dialogic meeting, man becomes and transcends himself. He becomes and transcends himself. These are very powerful. Or you actualize yourself, and at the same time you can actually go beyond yourself. and transcending, again, is a very complex term. Some philosophers would distinguish between horizontal transcendence and vertical transcendence. So these are different concepts of transcendence. It is in virtue of its dialogical character that human life touches upon absoluteness and acquires an absolute meaning that overpasses its own conditioned nature. Now, this concept of dialogic, okay, is the matrix of man, finite infinity. Now, he tries to combine finite because man deals with, the mundane, interacts, connects with the world, with man, with fellow men. But at the same time, he connects with God. Finite infinity. Okay? We are finite, but at the same time, we are ordained towards the transcendent being. We have a relationship with transcendent being. So that brings us to the third point of the dialogic. That relation is triadic. It's the self, fellow man, and God. It's triadic. Right? So it's not limited to man and fellow man. It's not only between man and man, because it is also between man and God. You see, this is the other aspect of his philosophical anthropology. That idea or that notion about relationship between man and God. So, again, later I'm going to talk about there's always the above and the below. Okay. So, here, hence, the fundamental relation is triadic, the self, God, and other. And sometimes, the other is also extended, not just to fellow man, it's also extended to environment, to nature, to the animal world. So some commentators and some writers of Buber, they use this paradigm, they use this context in order to write something about, as I already mentioned, relationship with nature, relationship with tree, with animals, and so on, with environment. So real relationship with other human beings is possible only in terms of real relationship with God. I'll talk about that. I'll reserve that for the other, for the religious. No? So, authentic human existence is living a dialogic life. Again, we hear contemporary existential philosophers talk about authentic, meaningful human existence. Sartre talks about freedom as the basis of authentic existence. No? Marcel would talk about coexistence as the basis of authentic human existence. And many other philosophers will talk about authentic human existence. And for Buber, the basis of authentic human existence is living the dialogic life. So he said, although it's possible, man cannot live without eat, it's impossible to exist, to survive without eat. For us to have authentic existence, we must enter into that I-thou relationship. Because that I-thou relationship is what makes our existence, our life, meaningful. So, of course, you cannot dispense with the I eat. We're not going to eat the food that we just ate without the I eat relation. Okay? But of course, we cannot just dwell on that, because for Buber, there's a more important attitude or relationship, which is the I-thou relationship. So, the two types of relationship into which human beings enter, the I-it and the I-thou, and this, we possess a twofold primary attitude. In the book I-it, in the book I-thou, the first lines, I said something like, our relationship is based on the twofold attitude. The attitude expressed by the words I eat and I thou. Okay? So here is actually talking about attitudes. Okay? The attitude of objectivity and the attitude of relationship. And based on these two attitudes of objectifying and relating corresponds our two relationships. Two fundamental types of relation. When we have that objective attitude, then we establish the I-thou or the I-it relationship. when we establish that relating attitude, then we have the I-thou relationship. So the relationship is based on the way we perceive, the way that our attitude towards things, towards the world, towards other people. Okay? So, he calls this I-it relationship characterized by objectification, control of nature and people. So the I, in this relationship, seeks to acquire, to possess as much as it can, and perceives itself as being an individual who is set over against the subjects of its perception. Okay, so very much similar to some of the concepts of Marcel, okay, about being closed off, being isolated, being individual, and so on and so forth. Right? So the I pays a price for such selfishness and will dominate because it is isolated and alienated from the source of life. The world of it is not evil, and of it evil in and of itself. We all live in this world. We need the I-it. Okay? We all relate to that which is outside of us, even ourselves as objects. So that's one part of the attitude. Okay? And that is the basis of the I-it relationship. Okay? Our attitude of domination, of manipulation, and so on and so forth. Reminds me, those of you who are familiar with Marcel, that's actually the attitude of having. Okay, having connected to primary reflection, secondary.
Yes.
The having is secondary reflection. The objective way of reflecting, that's primary reflection. Okay. And then you consider this to be a problem. So these are connected. So you have the having, you have the primary reflection, and you have problem. Okay, those of you who are familiar with Marcel. And then you have being, secondary reflection, and yes, isn't mystery. Okay, and mystery. So different, maybe concepts, different terminology, but pointing to the same direction. Okay, the I-it and the I-thou, right? So, and again, of course, the second is the authentic way, which he calls the I-thou relationship. So here, people come together, encounter one another in the deepest level possible. Okay, the deepest level possible. And I think some of your questions and your sharing actually provides us with concrete examples regarding this. Okay? So again, if you're going to connect this, those of you who are Marcelian, then you can connect this, associate this to the concept of being of Marcel, the secondary reflection, and mystery, and what else? Hope, creative fidelity, availability, and so on and so forth. Okay, so more or less, these philosophers are kindred spirits in that sense. So it's nice to study these two philosophers side by side because more or less, although they belong to different religious traditions, but they have common ideas, right? Now, the second is that his philosophy is not just biological relation; it's actually religious. Okay, his philosophy actually is categorized under religious existentialism. Okay, those of you who are into existentialism, we know that there are two fundamental, types of existentialism. You have the atheist and the theist, and there's, of course, somebody in between. Okay? Heidegger doesn't want to be categorized as atheist or theist. No, he's something in between. So anyway, so even Buber, like Marcel and Kierkegaard, who else? And they belong to the theist group. Okay? Alright, so the dialogical man is a religious man. Because again, as I've said, there is that relationship with the fellow man. Now, we can use the word thou. Our fellow man is the thou. God is also a thou. So if our fellow man is a thou, he is a finite thou, and God becomes the eternal thou. And of course, Buber makes a distinction between how come man is finite, not just because of this temporality, and how come that God is the eternal thou. Not just because he's God. Right? There's a reason for saying that God is the eternal thou. So, he sees man as essentially oriented to God, the eternal thou. Eternal thou because while we can consider God as an it, attitude natin sa Diyos, hingi tayo ng hingi, di ba? Dasal tayo, Lord, sana manalo ko sa ganito, Lord, sana ganito. Sana. Ginawa nating ATM yung Diyos, di ba? Pagka may kailangan tayo, hihingi lang tayo para automatic may ibibigay. It din yun. Pero, God is eternal because no matter how we conceive Him to be an it, He will always be a thou to us, or for us. Okay? That's the eternal thou that He meant. So, life is someone and sending. The someone and sending here, it's always someone is to be called and to be sent. Okay, so you can call these figures of speech. You can call these. There's actually an article about Buber's language, especially the language of the first book, I and Thou, as a kind of a semantic passer, because you don't know what he's talking about. Someone and sending, above and below. So you have to take that, because there's some kind of a mysticism surrounding the language of the first book of Buber. The second book that I mentioned to the RT that you must read for this course is Between Man and Man and the Knowledge of Man, which are more or less easy reading. The I and Thou is also easy reading, but it's difficult to interpret what he meant by some of those lines. So, someone and sending, to be called and to be sent. And every man has his unique being, has a gift from God, and it is his responsibility to realize it in its wholeness. So, again, he's alluding to that God invited us, someone inviting us, and we are sent. Sent to what? Sent to our parliament to establish relationships. So there's always that. I hope it's already in the. All right. There's always that. The above and below. The above is our relationship with God, and the below is our relationship with our fellow men. Okay. Now, man's relation with God is one of dialogue. So the dialogue is not just a dialogue between man and man. It's actually a dialogue between God and man. The released man commits his whole being in God's dialogue with the world and stands firm on this dialogue. Standing firm meaning keeping that faith in God. Now you have to remember that why is he talking like this? He's a Jew. So he takes from his Jewish tradition, from his Jewish roots. And of course, we know that the Jews are privileged to have that relationship, that close, intimate relationship with God. Okay? So, that relationship based on trust. Okay? And there are many instances, the whole history of the Israelites, starting from Abraham down when he reached the promised land, and in between, the relationship is always a relationship of trust. And of course, we know in the history of the Jewish people that this trust has been tested so many times. Okay? Tested so many times. But no matter how the Jewish people failed so many times, they've always been welcomed back, they're always invited, they're always summoned. Okay? So that's the idea of the summoning and sending. God made no tool for himself. He needs none. He created for himself a partner in the dialogue of time. Now this is very particular to Buber. God does not need to create man. He is complete. Why create? What's the whole point of creating man? According to Buber, because God invited man to have that kind of relationship. He created for himself a partner in dialogue. And in this dialogue, God speaks to every man through the life which He gives him again and again. So here, He's not just talking about the history of the whole Jewish people. Okay? The relationship or the invitation is not just an invitation to the Jewish people. It's actually an invitation to every single man. Okay? So later on, I will talk about creation, redemption, and revelation. Concepts that have very particular meaning in Christianity. And Buber gives it a very Jewish interpretation. Okay? So, therefore man can only answer God with the whole of his life, the way in which he lives this given life. So, for Buber, the way we live our life is a kind of, it's a kind of answer to that invitation. Okay. So, the whole of life for Buber takes a religious meaning. Okay. We go back to Kierkegaard. We say that Kierkegaard is also very intense in terms of his religiosity. But I cannot see a more intense religiosity than Buber's kind of religiosity. Okay. It's very intense because he sees of course, Kierkegaard also talks about relationship with God. Those of you who are familiar with the third states, religious states, where Kierkegaard talks about our little faith, okay? And actually, Kierkegaard talks about being a single one. When you become a single one, single-heartedly, spiritually, you address your whole being to God. Buber buys that idea. Only that for Buber is that you cannot have just one relationship. Just that relationship with God, and then you forget about your other relationship. Because that vertical relationship is impossible for Buber without that horizontal relationship. Your relationship with God is impossible if you don't establish good relationship with your fellow man. Something that, according to Buber, Kierkegaard has ignored. He has ignored. Remember, you have to kill your son Isaac because you have to suspend the ethical because of the religious. Teleological suspension of the ethical. Teleological suspension of the ethical makes possible that religious, that spiritual, that leap. Okay? Something that for Buber is impossible. Because you cannot have that relationship with God unless if you forget the ethical, meaning that relationship with your fellow man. Alright. So, next is, faith is based on trust. The basis for all the statements about faith is the dialogical relation trust, not the belief in dogmatic contents. And this actually is views about Christianity. Of course, Christians will also respond. It seems like you have misunderstood our faith. Okay? Because while there are dogmatic contents in our theology, our faith, our Christian faith is not just also based on, adherence to this dogma. But that's very important, okay? Based on relation of trust. And I think, again, connecting this to those of you who are in Marcel would say hope. That notion of hope. Okay? Trust and hope are actually somehow connected. The hope there is, of course, Marcel is doing his Christian interpretation, and this one is doing a Jewish interpretation. So, one can believe that God is and live in his back. He who trusts him lives in his face. That's the point. You believe in God and then live in his back. You believe in God, but you don't live your life according to that belief. Like Adam and Eve, or like Cain. He lived in God, but he cannot face God. Why? Because he did something wrong. He hid. Okay? But he who trusts in God lives in His face. Trust in God, you can live in God's face. Nothing to hide. There are those people who say, believe in God, but does not live according to that faith. And therefore, hides himself. A person who trusts. So here he makes a distinction between just believing and trusting. Okay? Your wife can tell you, I believe you. You were in the office. Can she also say, I trust that you are in the office? There's a difference between believing and trusting. Diba? No? Believing and trusting. So for Buber, our faith in God must not just be based on a belief. It must be based on trust. And again, as I've said, in the whole history of Jewish people, this trust has been tested. So, trust is proving trust in the fullness of life in spite of the experience course of the world. Religious faith, so I just read this. Religious faith does not result from the mindless recitations of religious formulas or from the adherence to an unintelligible liturgical routines, but from the total commitment of one's being and one's life to the eternal Tao. There is no statement about God which does not at the same time state something about man. For Buber, the biblical history of belief of Israel is a living tradition, a dialogical history between God and man, from the calling of Abraham out of his environment, the covenant Mount Sinai, up to the prophets, a dialogical history which demands anyone who joins it. So he alludes, he refers to that long history of the Jewish people as a relationship of trust. I already mentioned Kierkegaard regarding this, and Kierkegaard has actually a similar take on this. About Christianity. The Christian faith is not about, so if you want to answer Buber regarding his take on this, then you can go back to Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard also talks about Christian faith is not about this recitation, etc., etc. It's actually our commitment when we abandon ourselves to God. And when Kierkegaard talks about the abandonment, total commitment, leap of faith, it's actually a commitment of trust. Okay? So, those of you can actually write a thesis about this. Okay, so, next point. The relationship between God and man is a supreme meeting, which gives meaning to our life. A supreme meeting. Because there are meeting. He used the word meeting here, meeting meaning relationship. And he actually wrote his autobiography, and he titled it Mismeeting. Mismeeting. So if there is meeting, there is mismeeting. What is this mismeeting that he's talking about? Many of these contemporary philosophers, existentialists rather, their philosophies are actually born out of their own personal experiences. You know that, no? So if Sartre is an atheist, you have to read his autobiography to fully understand why he became an atheist. Right? And if Buber was consumed in his life, in his philosophical career about relationship, meeting, etc., etc., it was actually triggered also by an opposite, a contrary experience about mismeeting. The mismeetings in his earlier life, during his childhood. I mentioned that his parents separated when he was about 5 years old. Parents separated, and he was being taken care of by his yaya. And when he asked his yaya, when is his mother coming back? And the yaya, the nanny, just told him, she is never coming back. Because the yaya knows that the parents separated. And for Buber, based on his autobiography, he said, that's my first experience of mismeeting. Meaning separation, detachment, of isolation. And from there on, he was consumed with this idea of meeting, relationship, dialogue, and so on and so forth. So if there's one experience in Buber, remember, 5 years old, already have this idea of detachment, separation, mismeeting. Well, in fact, he's a very intense thinker. I remember reading that he was so consumed with the idea of time and space. What is time? What is space? When he was 12 years old, he read the prolegomena to Future Metaphysics of Kant, 12 years old, because he wanted to solve this problem of time and space. And for some time, that idea, of course, Kant was talking about time and space as categories of the mind. So somehow he was relieved from that tension, that problem about space and time, because he was actually, if I cannot resolve this problem about time and space, or space and time, I might as well end my life. Imagine, 12 years old, that's the... I hope we don't have 12 years old like that. They should enjoy their gadgets, no? But maybe, think about it. If now 12 years old are so busy with their gadgets, maybe they have to be consumed with thinking about time, space, eternity, cosmos, and so on and so forth. Right? Anyway, so that's the meeting that's talking about. There's a supreme meeting, a relationship. Okay? In dialogue, man turns to God, and this turning is nothing less than our redemption in God. Again, I already mentioned creation. Okay? The creation is, God gave us a space to stand on. Okay? The revelation there is when God revealed himself and invited man. That's the ceremony. God inviting man for a relationship. And when you answer, when you respond to that invitation, put your trust in him. That's redemption. So revelation for Buber and redemption are connected things. The revelation is God invite us for a relationship, summoning us. Yeah, summon you. Okay? And then, when you answer back, when you respond, that's the redemption. Okay? That's redemption. That's actually giving your life meaning. Okay? So the meaning, the authenticity of life is when you respond to His call. So by turning towards God, we enter into a life-altering relationship. We receive the presence of God as power, as gift, as revelation. Our lives become laden with meaning, a meaning which, while having to bear, is nonetheless real, palpable, reassuring. And neither synagogue, nor church, nor mosque, nor university can determine what this meaning is for us. Very nice, no? Pwede mo sabihin, sa estudyante mo, no lecture, not even this one, will give meaning to your life. Why? Because it will be you who will discover that meaning. And of course, according to Buber, our meaning, our life will only have meaning if we establish that relationship with the mysterious, with the transcendent, because our relationship here in the class will not have any meaning at all without that relationship with God. Okay, so that's the take of Buber. So the meaning of life, next point, actually connected to this, is in the context of our relationship with God. The meaning of my life, in the context of my meeting with God, is specific to the circumstances of my life. Again, we're talking about existential particularities, specific. So it gives us the strength and courage to control the problems of our lives, of our community, of our world. We enter into relationship with God. We perceive we are responsible for those whom we consider to be strangers, even enemies. And again, I go back to that question a while ago about the Christians and the Jews and the Arabs. Okay? So the man or woman who has turned to God has abolished moral judgment forever. The evil man is simply one who is commended to him responsibility, one even more needy of love. So again, that is the religious aspect of his philosophy. So for us to understand Buber's philosophy, let's not just talk about the relational and the dialogical, because that's just one side of the story. I think the more intense part of his thought is the religious, because the dialogical and the relational takes a whole different meaning when you put in there this religious context. And you can understand this because he's no ordinary existentialist philosopher. He's drawing inspiration from his Jewish roots. Okay, from his Jewish roots. And more or less, you can understand how, because I think he represents the Jewish tradition, the Jewish culture. If we want to have a dialogue, Nostra Aetate comes to mind, okay? Dialogue with the Jews, then you have Buber as, a kind of inspiration for this kind of dialogue. And it's not just between the Jews and the Christians, actually between the Christians and the Muslims. Now, there are many people who have used Buber as a kind of paradigm context for this interreligious dialogue. And I have used him many times in my writings. Okay, questions so far? None? Yes.
Does Buber's notion of mutual relationship between man and man, or the vertical relationship, ends in death, or it continues even after death? Because I think, if, for example, our loved ones, there's still that intimate relationship between the living and the dead.
Yeah, yes. Of course, it takes a different form altogether, no? Because you will no longer recognize the presence of the other as existential or concrete presence. But the presence, kasi for Buber, takes a very complex, different forms. The awareness of the presence, and you can say, but I am constantly aware of the presence of my ancestors, or I am constantly aware of the presence of my father. A lot of people greet their father, happy birthday in heaven. You see, we still establish that kind of relationship, or that kind of awareness. And you can still accommodate that. I mean, Buber may not be explicit in that sense, but given this, yes, you can extend that interpretation to that. Okay, and then the second one is existential and situational. The human existence becomes the ground of dialogue. Why ground of dialogue? Well, of course, the dialogue happens in concrete human existence, or in our concrete human lives. Okay? So, his philosophy proceeds from human existentiality, from human experiences. It's already mentioned to you that many of the thoughts of the existentialist philosophers are born out of their personal experiences. So the notion of dialogue is born out of that, of those personal experience. A dialogic cannot be derived from metaphysical abstractions. It is rooted in concrete experience. And again, well, if you go back to other philosophers like the medieval and the modern, I don't know how they process their thoughts. Okay. So the question is, are their philosophies born out of their personal experiences? Because for the existentialists, I think you can always go back to their own lived experiences as the basis for their own philosophies. These are not abstractions. No? So when Buber talks about meeting and relationship and I thou, you can trace that back to his personal experiences. Well, I don't know if the cogito of Descartes can be traced back to the real experience about the wax. Was there really a wax? Or the whole meditations on first philosophy was just a product of his own very fertile imagination? No? Well, of course, we know for a fact that after he had a dream and then he dreamt about what's he going to do with his life, then started meditating. We know that. That's what he said. But, or, for example, like the categorical imperative of Kant, for example, the second formulations of the categorical equality about the human person, treat not as means, but as an end. That is born out of the personal experience of Kant having to treat people as ends, not as means. See, so that's the point there is that for philosophers like this, they don't want to, their philosophies are not born out of these metaphysical abstractions. And that's something that's very common among the existentialists, because you can always go back to one particular experience of their own about those concepts. Think of the 3 stages of life of Kierkegaard. That's actually born, you can also trace that back to his own personal experience. Ayoko maging parang chismoso rito, pero you can connect that to his relationship with Regina Olsen. Right? So, siguro pwede rin kayo gumawa ng sarili nyong filosofiya base sa inyong mga personal na karanasan para hindi naman maging abstraction lang, metaphysical abstraction yung ating mga sinasabi sa classroom. Okay, so I remember again, sino ba yung sabi? I think it was Nietzsche who said that parang it's a personal memoir. Right? Yung mga philosophies natin, personal memoir. Again, next point, truth is in action in every lived moment. Again, sabi natin, ano klaseng truth ito? Now, don't take truth here as in the context of correspondence or coherence. Okay? Hindi yun. This truth here is existential truth. Okay? What Marcel would say, the truth that you can live and die for. That's existential truth. Okay? Why would you offer your life for the truth about whether today is Monday or Tuesday? See? But when Christ was asked, and what is the truth? Okay? So that's the kind of truth that the existentialists are talking about. The existential truth, the truth that matters to our life. The subjective truth that Kierkegaard is talking about. Not the objective truth of math and science. Okay? So truth here is in every lived moment. The truth of the single one only exists in his producing in himself in action. Meaning what we do, what we act in our life. Human truth is bound up with the responsibility of the person. Man finds the truth to be only when he confirms it. By conforming, meaning you live your life according to the truth, to the belief that you hold on to. Now, next, ethics is situational. And situational ethic of responsibility. Now, that could be quite complicated because that means that the ethics of Buber is relative because it is situational. No. But when you say situational, it does not mean that it is always relativistic or relative. Okay? The point here is that responsibility is where there is responding or real answer. The readiness to respond. If, for example, somebody asks you for help, what should you do? In that very moment, papunta ka na rito sa lecture ito, tapos sinabi ng nanay mo o ng asawa mo, Dad, pwede bang linisin mo muna ito? That's the ethic of responsibility. Ibig sabihin, it's your ability to respond in that precise moment of what is the right thing to do. The moral thing, the ethical thing to do. Kasi kung minsan sabihin mo, don't help the poor. That's very ethical when we help the poor. And then, may dumating pumunta dyan sa harap mo na pulubi at namamalimos. Kung humihingi ng tulong ng pagkain, anong gagawin mo? Nagdalawang isip ka pa kung ibibigay mo yung hamburger na kinakain mo. Pero nasa isip mo, helping the poor is good. So what is the ethics there? See? So the point here is that here, real answering, real responding for that moment when you are asked to do the right thing. Because sometimes,
Prima facie duty.
well, you can say it's a gross. Yeah, you can say it's prima facie duty. Right? Pero kumisan, kahit na prima facie duty, hindi pa rin natin ginagawa. So ang point ni Buber is, gawin mo yan. Kung hindi mo naman gagawin, kung wala kang response, wala kang sagot, that's not genuine responsibility. We can talk a lot of things about protecting the environment, being honest, etc., etc., etc. And then when that moment comes, when you have to do your part, you don't respond. That's not genuine responsibility. Genuine responsibility is here. Readiness to respond at that precise moment. That's situational ethics for you. Hindi yung, depende sa sitwasyon. Yun ang relativistic, depende sa sitwasyon. Ito na yung pagkakataon na tumulong rin. You have to respond. That's genuine responsibility. Meron kang 100 pesos. Baon mo yun sa isang araw. Tapos merong lumapit sa'yo. Sir, hindi pa po kumakain eh. Ang gagawin mo? Sige, hati na lang tayo. Itong 50 sa akin. That's genuine responsibility. Pero kung isipin mo, teka, dami ko pang gagawin. 100 lang nga lang ito. Kunin mo pa. Pero tinuturo mo ethics. Diba? Tinuturo mo, ito. Tapos isip, depende. May kailangan ba talaga ito? Sometimes I also go through that thought process. Niloloko lang naman ako. Baka hindi naman talaga ito gutom. Hindi naman talaga kailangan niya ng pera. Pero inisip ko, kung lulukohin mo ko, bahala ka sa sarili mo. Basta ako, nagbigay ako sa'yo. Bahala ka na kung niloko mo ko. Basta ako wala akong bibitbitin sa sarili ko na hindi ako nag-respond sa hinihingi mo. Siyempre, magtitira din ako sa sarili ko. Kaya yung 100 ko, hati tayo. 50 sa'yo, 50 sa akin. But the point here is that ito yung situational na ethic of responsibility. Alright. And then, the next point, last point here, protest against personalization and objectivity. And I think this character of Buber's thought is not just, it's not something unique. It's not something that you can only find in Buber. Because the existentialist philosophers also talk about the personalization and objectification. So it's an affirmation of relation and community. He rejected the atomistic individualism. Ito din sinasabi ko about individualism and collectivism. Alright? So, atomistic individualism and totalitarian collectivism. Okay. You can think of many examples of these two. So we affirm, true community, only men who are capable of truly saying thou to one another and can truly say we with one another. So this is, the saying of thou to one another is a counter to atomistic individualism. Atomistic individualism meaning me and me and me and me alone. The response there for Buber is saying the thou to the other. Totalitarian collectivism simply sees the collectivity. Okay? The conglomeration, never seeing the individuals that comprise that collectivity. So the answer to that totalitarian collectivity, which somehow diminishes the individual, is a community based on the we relationship. Because in the we relationship, we recognize the individual I. Okay. Not just the collective, but the individuals that comprise, the I's that comprise that collectivity. So for Buber, there are two levels of intersubjectivity here. The interpersonal, which he calls the interhuman, and the social. Interhuman and the social. The I, thou in the interhuman, and the we in the social. And of course, the next point is, I already mentioned this, is affirmation of the uniqueness and the wholeness of man. Okay? So I will not talk about that. I think I have said much about that concept. All right. So I think that's about it. Then I will go to the next. Unless you have some questions about that, then I go to the next one. Any questions? None. All right. Kunti na lang yung oras natin para this. Hanggang ano oras ba tayo? Party? Hindi ba tayo? 1 o'clock? Hindi, joke lang. Yung lunch.
So, yung class ng sabi mo sa akin,
Well,
2:30.
yung ulit. No, yung last time natin. Ano ang schedule?
But sir, if gusto niyo sir hanggang 5, hindi na accommodate.
Gagaro ng intellectual indigestion to. I think I have said so much. Anyway, I'll just finish this topic and then we'll have a break. Okay? Yung next topic sa after lunch naman. Kailangan din natin food for the stomach, hindi lang food for the Yes.
Oh, sorry po.
Okay.
So, yung clarify ko lang po yung matabi ko na din pong pinuproblema yung dalawang points na looking po bang interpersonal and social, ang goal po ba dun is what we do in the interpersonal should also be in the social. Ano po ba yung dynamics ng dalawa? Are we closer doon po sa una? And then the idea of closeness po doon is parang mas mahirap sa social or the challenge is both to the two dimensions.
Okay, actually, the point, Buber wants to maintain, we need to maintain the two. So, there's no way that we should subsume one over the other or see the other in the context of the other. So, there is the interpersonal relationship, the I-thou relationship. So, for example, in the case of friends, between husband and wife, in the family, etc., etc. So that's a personal relationship, and it has a very different dynamics because we can share. So the concept is sharing. We can share ourselves, and by selves meaning our inner thoughts. No? Like for example, in the case of couples, married people, so there are levels, degrees of sharing of selves. Okay, and then of course there are also levels of sharing selves among friends or between friends. So you have to respect the dynamics. But of course, there's another level of relationship, and that is the social level, or sometimes Buber calls the social dimension. Because when you say level, parang up and ano, diba? So he calls that the interpersonal dimension and the social dimension. So it's a different dimension altogether. Okay? So in that we relationship, you recognize people as individuals. You have your own goals, you have your own, personalities, etc., etc. But what defines the we relationship is not the sharing of personal experiences. Because when you get into that, then it's no longer social, it becomes an interpersonal. In the social is that you are sharing your common ideas, your common goals, etc., etc. Like for example, in this case, this could be a social, a we relationship. You have a common goal, study, earn points, etc., etc. Alright? So you will maintain that dimension. But it's possible that within that dimension, there could be an interhuman relationship. Friends, couple, etc. Okay? But these are two different dimensions. But it's very much possible, and it's real, that within that social relationship exists an interpersonal relationship. But the two have different dynamics. They have two different dynamics. And again, the reason why I connect Buber and Wojtyla is because of these similar things, because Wojtyla also talks about the IU relationship, very much similar to Buber. And he talks of the community of persons. Okay? And that community of persons is the we relationship. Wojtyla added something, the concept of common good. Common good to the we relationship. That's actually what defines the community, the notion of the common good. And for Wojtyla, there are still two different senses of the common good. The objective sense of the common good and the subjective sense of the common good. The objective is that we have a common goal outside of us. We want to attain that. The subjective sense is that there is a common driving force among us that, that drives us to work for that common goal. So there is the objective common good and there is the subjective, the common desire to achieve that common objective. Without that subjective common good, we'll never be able to attain the objective common good without that common desire. So you understand the common good in that sense. Which is not very much pronounced in Buber, because of course it's coming from a different, perspective. But they have this idea of two dimensions of intersubjectivity. That's why when I talk about intersubjectivity, I always have to make a point of differentiating these two dimensions, and they have different dynamics. Any questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, how did Buber see the establishment of a real, authentic I and thou relation? Is it in the route of suspending historical identities? When I say historical identities, you being a Muslim, being an Arab or a Jew, or is it on the route of recognizing those identities? Saan dun sa dalawa, tinignan ni Buber para ma-establish ang I and thou?
Actually, the point of Buber is that we should not look at the relationship from this perspective. Kasi lumalabas parang kine-categorize na kagad yung tao. Ito Arab to, itong Muslim to. Ito belonging to this cultural background or political or religious background.
But isn't that a form of partitionism as well? You have to suspend the identity of an individual to see him matches.
No, hindi siguro suspend. Parang, well, in some sense, parang sinususpend mo. But the focus of Buber is this. Just be aware that the man in front of you is a human being. Of course, that's very difficult to do, right? It's difficult, for example, pumasok ka sa isang lugar, tapos nakaturban. Tapos gusto mong tingnan, tao ito eh. Pero hindi kagad nata ang tao na nakikita mo, yung turban niya. So that's a very, very difficult thing to do. But para kay Buber, para magkaroon ka nga ng ganitong klase ng yung idol relationship na yan, dapat umabot ka, nandun ka sa ano yun. Nandun ka sa level na yun. Of course, that's very difficult. And quite impossible. Diba? It's really quite impossible.
Bordering the impossible.
Bordering to the impossible. But, sa akin, if we want some hope, siguro dapat ganoon yung attitude. Kaya sabi niyan, depende sa attitude mo yan eh. Yung relationship, our relationship is dependent on our attitude towards the world, attitude towards other people. And if in the attitudinal level that is impossible, that relationship is also impossible.
Crossing that threshold of hope and hope that threshold.
Yeah. If there should be, if we can at least approach the threshold and then overcome, yun na yung posible yun. Ito, many years ago, I attended this intercultural, interreligious dialogue in Indonesia. And then, of course, when you are in Indonesia and you are Catholic, you are the minority of the minority. But since it's a conference organized by the AACP. AACP is the association of, before it was Catholic, now it's already Christian. Association of Christian Philosophers. Asian Association of Catholic Philosophers. It's Christian, kasi gusto lang maging inclusive, no? Many of the participants, of course, because we are in Indonesia, are Muslims. And we are talking of interreligious dialogue. So in my presentation, I was talking about we can only have a genuine interreligious dialogue or whatever kind of dialogue if we can sit side by side with one another, regardless kung Christian ka, Buddhist ka, or Muslim ka. Okay? My point there is that it depends on your attitude. Because if you cannot sit by side comfortably with a person who is different from, I mean, you are Catholic and this guy is a Muslim and the other guy is a Buddhist, if you cannot side by side comfortably with them, you cannot establish those relationships. Because it will have to start on the attitudinal level. Sa atin, sabihin natin, ay, huwag kang tatabi dyan, ano yan? Huwag kang tatalikod dyan, baka mamaya kung mangyari sa'yo. Yung ganong klase ng mentality, that's the first hindrance to dialogue, the attitude. So the dialogue should start with the attitude. Niniwala ko kay Buber, yung relationship natin nakabase doon sa attitudes natin. Yung dalawang ina-identify niya, yung I it at saka yung I know niya. Well, mahirap gawin kung tutusin. Kasi mahirap bumaba doon sa level ng attitude niyo. We can always talk about dialogue. Pero kung yung attitude hindi nagbago, walang say-say yung mga dialogue niya. Sige. Ikaw na.
And for Buber, a genuine I and thou relationship is also a kind of inclusion.
Okay? Yeah. Inclusion, but not inclusion as in that you absorb the other person to you. Because that would be absorption for Buber. Inclusion would be, sama tayo dito. Establish relationship. Okay? I welcome you. You are part of, you're part of this thing. So that's, if that is the inclusion thing, yes.
I was thinking lang doon sa yung social dimension. In connection with the political, with Israel and Palestine conflict. The social dimension, as you mentioned, it is for the common good, common ideas. Can we use it as an approach to para maging maayos yung historically and politically conflict ng Israelites and Palestinians? And which is, kanina Doc sabi nyo na medyo umaalis si Buber sa politics na is it possible na mawala yung politics doon and by nature and historically political yung kanilang conflicts? So, paano papasok natin yung social dimension na sinasabi ni Buber sa gano'ng by nature na politics yung pinagsimulan niya?
Okay. I think for Buber, the reason why he does not want to involve yung politics dito because it's not because of politics per se. But when you politicize everybody takes sides. Pagka naging political yung issue, nagkakampihan. So there's nothing wrong with politics per se for as long as you can have this from a rational level na walang kampihan. But when the question there is when you try to politicize something, dito ko sa kabila, dito ko sa kabila. So doon pa lang yung attitude na gano'n na kampihan tayo, hindi na mag-work out kahit sa anong level. Kahit na sa personal level, gano'n pag nagkaroon ng kampihan yan, wala na. Kahit walang conflict pero kampihan na tayo, wala na. No? But if we leave everything open, whether it's political or not, if we leave everything open na walang kampihan, then well, of course, pwede naman kasing Arabo ako, Hudyo ako, o Kristiyano ako, pero hindi tayo nagkakampihan. Hindi nagkakampihan yung, kung Arabo ka, kampi ka sa Arabo. Kung Kristiyano ka, kampi ka sa kapwa mong Kristiyano. And that's the negative aspect of the politics there. You already take sides.
Just a follow-up. Pero the politics and the conflicts as a material condition, territorial pa lang, yung gawayan nila. So, possible kaya yun na hindi magkampihan ng mga Arabs and versus the Israelites and territorial namin to. Kami talaga. Parang our issue also in the West Philippine Sea. So, paano natin i-resolve yung mga ganitong conflicts outside the politics?
Actually, sa kanilang manggagaling yan kasi meron akong, actually, this is not a, sabi ng iba, istorya daw ito ng Arab at saka Israelites. Sabi naman ng isang nagkwento sa akin, kwento ito ng Serbs at saka nung katabi ng sa Czechoslovakia. So kanya-kanyang kanya-kanyang version ng kwentong ito. And this is the story. So may neighbors na matagal na magkaaway. Matagal na sila magkaaway. So sabi ng isa, anong pwedeng ibigay sa'yo na pag binigay ito yun sa'yo, makikipagbati ka na doon sa kabila, sa kaaway. Di, sabi niya, sige, bibigyan kita. Halimbawa, binigyan kita ng ganito. Kailangan ibigay din sa kabila. Di ba? Pag binigay yan para, din magkakabati na kami. Sabi, paano naman kung halimbawa, ano yung kukunin sa kanya na gusto mong ibigay? Bigay mo doon sa kabila. Ibigay mo, tapos, kukunin sa'yo, sa kanya, tapos ibibigay sa'yo. Sabi ng isa, sige. Kung ano ibibigay niya, lalampasan ko, parang gano'n. Sige, kunin mo sa kanya yung kanyang isang mata. Or, balik-balikan, ibibigay ko sa kanya yung isang mata ko. So, ang mangyayari, kapag binigay ko yung isang mata ko sa kanya, kukunin sa kanya yung dalawang mata. So, mabubulag na siya, kabila. Now, what is the moral of the story? Ang point is that, laging wini-wish mo kung ano yung masama doon sa kabila. Kaya kung magsakripisyo ng isang mata lang, basta wala na siyang mata. And that's how they describe the relationship between the Arabs or the Palestinians and the Jew. So kung ganun yung kanilang attitude, wala mangyayari. Di ba? Kasi I can give us something as long as they give a lot. And that's a story na sabi ng iba kasi ang unang nagkwento sa akin ito ay isang professor from Tel Aviv na it's impossible to reconcile these two because this is their attitude towards one another. Tapos nasa Romania naman ako, isang iba naman yung nagkwento. The same story.